Welcome back to Seek Your Strength, and we're here with S&C Coaches React. We've got Cameron Rogers. She's a hammer thrower. She's got a PB of 77.67 meters for a hammer. Dara's got a little bit of her stats there. She's from Canada.
Yeah, so silver medal at World Championships in 2022, gold medal at Commonwealth Games Championships 2022, gold medal at World Under 20s Champs in 2018, and gold medal in Pan Am's Under 20s Champs 2017. So incredibly.
And fifth at the Olympics.
Really?
Yes.
Okay. And
no, I just made that up.
NCAA triple champ. Incredible. And record holder. What we're mainly concerned with is the S&C work and the lifting of weights generally. And that's why this video is here.
So she has a couple of different things up on her Instagram that I think are very interesting to talk about or useful to talk about. So the first thing, we'll start with the Olympic lifts, or the kind of Olympic lift variation that she uses. So she's got a couple of these, I want to call them complexes. So it's kind of a touch and go, say 2 touch and go pulls, high pulls generally, into a full power clean or a full snatch. So she's got one here. This looks to be 130 kilos. Or maybe 125, depending on if she's using a male or a female bar. It looks like a men's bar. So you just touch and go hang power clean, or touch and go pull into a hang power clean. Now, if you saw any lifter doing this, anyone else doing this with any kind of weight for weightlifting with similar form, you'd be like, okay, this isn't the most productive thing you could be doing for your weightlifting. But in the case of her, for her hammer throwing, or for her sport specific work, or for her S&C for her sport, this is actually something that I'm not mad at. I'm actually think there's a couple of different qualities she gets out of this. Yeah,
I think one of the main things you get from this is that kind of heavy explosive eccentric loading of the back, or like the posterior chain, and it's something you don't ever really get in any other aspect of S&C. So eccentric loading, or lengthening while under tension, is where a massive amount of your actual adaptation will occur, right? Or where a massive amount of that neural adaptation and actual muscle breakdown will occur. You really don't see kind of heavy eccentric loading for the posterior chain too often, particularly at these kind of speeds, because rarely are you going to see somebody in a good morning style lift dropping down very quickly and stopping. You certainly won't see somebody in a deadlift kind of dropping that deadlift to 2 or 3 inches above the floor and then stopping. And when you're looking at loading up a thrower like this, so a very, very powerful athlete, that eccentric loading is really important. And those kind of heaving hang power cleans, or heaving hang clean high pulls, whatever you want to call them, are a really valuable way of getting that.
So interesting enough, in sport, for essentially all sports, there's a capability that some of the best athletes possess, and that is the ability to go from contraction to relaxation. Best athletes possess the ability to contract their muscles, relax the muscles, and then contract again with the smallest space of time between these 3 sequences. So they go from contracting the muscles to do their sport-specific activity. If it's running, so they'll take a stride, relax the requisite muscles, take the next stride. The more you can do this, the faster you can go from full contraction to full relaxation, my brain. The fastest you can go from full contraction to relaxation, the more repetitions you can do of your sport in a given time frame, which is very valuable for most sports. Even if this is just 1 and 2, something like hammer throwing, so there's not a huge amount of sport-specific repetitions per event, but there's still enough that it's incredibly important that you be able to do this. So it's the same in the snatch or the clean, all the way up to running. The more efficient athletes can do this, the better they can do it, the more valuable it is for their sport. And for her, in her sport, this is no different. And this is a very interesting way of doing this. So she gets these reps where she's contracting as much as possible, she's going relaxation fast as possible in a short frame of time. It's quite a heavy weight, so it's quite impressive that she's doing with this. But because she's in a power sport or a speed strength sport, it is very valuable that she does this with heavy weights. So she practices this not just with plyometrics, for example, but with actual heavy weights. And so this is quite a novel way of training this. And we do see other hammer throwers doing this style of kind of Olympic lifts, I suppose. It's very unique to hammer throwers. We don't see it in other sports because they're generally the most powerful. There's, for example, a German javelin thrower who does something similar. We've seen some other hammer throwers do this with hang power cleans. Generally what they'll do is they won't do 2 reps like she does, and she seems to do this consistently with this complex. A lot of times what they'll do is just bounce it down and then go into it, or they'll do one bounce to get some kind of life into the barbell and then go straight into a power clean. But for her, she seems very consistently trying to progress this complex across a period of time, which is definitely the best way to do that, because over the course of her career and over the course of her training blocks and successful training blocks, she can go, okay, so I was doing 120 this training season, next off season or 2 off seasons time I'd like to be able to get to 130 or 135. Or if she's in a scenario where she's looking at her performance and her power output and different variables, and her and her coach are discussing, and they see that she's really only reached like 115 or 120 in the off season, and then the subsequent throwing season was a little bit poor. So it's interesting variables to kind of correlate along with that, alongside training that capability.
The other thing I've always thought about when you see throwers doing those doubles and triples, or hang doubles and hang triples, or the longer complexes, is throwers are generating a lot of force, and it's not necessarily just in a kind of one split second like you see in weightlifting. You know, they are vroom, 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 and then going. Like that kind of momentum builds up over time. And it's funny when you watch these kind of complexes, that momentum, or that tempo of momentum, seems to build in the same way, where they're doing pull, pull, clean itself, you know.
Yep.
And it's a precursor movement, and then a one big, large, explosive movement. It's interesting. I wonder, is that something that's in their thought process?
You'd have to imagine it definitely is.
Yeah.
Maybe it's not something they may, if they thought of without, you know, constantly noticing it, or if it's something they were definitely like, okay, so we want to produce power over a longer time frame, and this is something that will help us to do that. Now, there's an interesting thing that I haven't seen other non-weightlifters do before, and I don't think I've ever seen any hammer throwers or other athletes, is the use of no contact muscle snatches. So this is something that, to be honest, I wouldn't normally use, and it would never be something we'd even think to use with athletes, and for a couple of different reasons. However, Cameron is quite a horse. She is quite a beast. So the ability for her to keep producing power over the course of this set is very impressive with these muscle snatches. So it looks to be about 52 kilos, I would think. The thing is, most lifters doing this wouldn't be able to produce repetitions where they could move it fast enough. We have weightlifters who are amateur intermediate weightlifters who do muscle snatches a lot, and in general butcher the muscle snatch, and no contact muscle snatch, and the barbell speed slows down too much, and generally it's not something you'd necessarily use for power production. But the fact that she's able to put in, bar to the last repetition, a lot of speed as much as possible, it's very consistently moving the barbell from dead stop to a very fast turnover, and then into each subsequent repetition, which are all staying at very high velocities, is getting a benefit from it. It's not the most conventional way of using any of the Olympic lifts or the Olympic lift variations, but it's definitely an interesting method.
That maintenance of speed across that 4 or 5 reps there is the very first thing I saw. Like, it's crazy.
Yeah, especially at 50 odd kilos.
Yeah, that it's a genuinely impressive. That's an impressive set, you know, like, because a lot of weightlifters will look at that, and they might be moving similar weights around, even though 53 or 55 kilos for a female lifter to be doing muscle snatches with is noteworthy in itself. But the fact that you're maintaining that speed and that bar height, like, or what you might talk about bar height until the elbows come underneath, the consistency of that over those later reps is unbelievable.
They look like Asics
weightlifting shoes,
but not like the Japanese ones.
I
think there's some kind of running shoe that looks like a weightlifting shoe a little bit. Maybe there's some kind of.
I think they could be like a crossover trainer.
Maybe, yeah. So in terms of like quality technique as well as this, that's exactly what you'd see in any weightlifter doing this kind of technique. Is it's very same, hips are coming in, she doesn't lean back. The press out at the end is quite normal for most weightlifters as fatigue slows them down. But there's also an absence of straps here as well, which is quite impressive. Yeah. So not something we probably ever will use with any athletes or anything like that, or we'd recommend people using. But what she's doing here certainly is making use of it and is getting productive work from it, I think, in my opinion.
It's a quite classic case of, if you're strong enough and fast enough to do that, it's really beneficial for you, but most people aren't strong enough or fast enough to do it.
Absolutely not. So moving on, then we have something that we see a lot of throwers or hammer throwers, discus throwers using, is box squats with a high bar position, touch and go for very heavy weights, and then for as fast as possible. We've seen, probably the most impressive one I've seen do this is Ashraf. He's a Qatari thrower. He's some incredible power production stuff. His S&C is the most impressive athlete I've ever seen, maybe to this day, but certainly in real life. Everything he was doing in his training, all the way from sit-ups, V-ups, power cleans, high box squats, was super powerful. And you see a lot of throwers are some of the most impressive athletes in terms of S&C stuff, and they kind of fly under the radar sometimes for how much get after it and how much power they put into each of their movements.
There's a few things here, like the use of the high bar box squat for throwers is like synonymous. You rarely see throwers training without it, to be honest. I think it's the best tool for that job. I think there's no reason for them to be doing ass to grass high bar squats. I think these are a better squat because they'll be able to do them heavier, they'll be able to do them faster, and they'll get more out of them that way. The touch and go is something that here I think is probably a bit more aggressive than we'd see with most other throwers doing them. But obviously it's a foam box being used underneath, so a lot of the time when you see someone slamming down into a box, they'll lose lower or mid back integrity. You're not seeing that here because the box has a bit of give in it, you know, because it's foam. Definitely something to be noteworthy of, though, that if you were to emulate this and you were using something like a bench or a solid plyo box, if you were going down with that same speed and aggression into the bottom and you hit it with that speed, there could be a problem of you losing mid-back integrity because of you kind of rounding forward as that impacted on your tailbone.
I wouldn't necessarily, just no benefit to throwers not doing A to G squats or ass to grass squats, but there's certainly benefit of them doing both of these. There's certainly, this in isolation is useful, but you do see a lot of throwers doing high bar squats. There's some, you know, quite heavy lifts as well. You know, you definitely get a benefit, and you see some of them front squatting as well. Yeah, which there's an athlete we'll get to eventually. Is the Latvian young fella? He's front squatting like 180. You know, which is not a massive front squat, but it's certainly notable that he's pushed his front squat 280 kilos. So both variations are definitely beneficial. But of all sports, the kind of power production for throwing, these certainly do seem to pair up a lot, and with good reason. Yeah. Lastly, we have something just kind of interesting, is this particular tool, and she calls it her favorite special strength exercise for core stability. So that's kind of a turn of phrase that you'll see in kind of Soviet text, so like special strength. So what that means usually is in specific to that sport. You do see a lot of throwers using this. Now, normally when you do things like this, the evidence in terms of like the sports science, but also in terms of kind of logical reasoning, is that this is usually not a good idea. So we'll see if we, for example, if we're playing baseball or tennis or something, and we use a weighted racket or a weighted baseball, we'd see that it's actually negative for adaptations because we change the motor habits. We're not actually training the specific muscle groups that we want and the sequencing that we want as fast as we want them to be doing. But in this case, I don't think this is necessarily an issue. I don't think she's replicating her exact sport by doing this. I think she's just following the similar chain of movement with something that's not really going to interfere with her capacity to do that, while probably benefiting her. And obviously she said it's her favorite. And we do see a lot of throwers doing this, so it's interesting to see how it's made its way in there.
I think when we were training with Ashraf, did he say he had a 75 kilo hammer?
No, it was like a 90 kilo hammer.
Well, something crazy.
He was doing this. There's definitely a video of it on his thing where he's doing like 90 kilos with this. So it's interesting that it's in there, and it's obviously made its way a lot. It's made its way across a lot of different throwers. Now, that doesn't always mean that something is actually a good idea. We see a lot of sports that things are culturally proliferated, but it doesn't necessarily mean it. But at the same time, I'm very open to this because you do see it quite consistently, and a lot of good throwers use it. Yeah. So it is interesting.
It's interesting as well that this seems to be an anti-rotation thing, rather than her using it as like trying to rotate something more aggressively with heavier weights, you know. Like she's in the start position moving around, then she's in more of a mid-rotation position moving around, and she's kind of building that static strength in those positions. I think it's just something that interests me on that, because people would classically think of that weighted implement being used to like produce more power, but in fact it looks like she's just working on postural strength here.
Are they throwing shoes, I wonder? Maybe that's what they are.
Maybe they are.
Maybe there's some kind of throwing shoe.
If someone knows, please put it in the comments.
I think they might be throwing shoes. I'm pretty sure that's what they are.
I should do a secret review on throwing shoes as weightlifting shoes.
Oh my god. Probably not a great idea.
Thanks very much for watching.
Hope you enjoyed this episode. Let us know if there's any athletes you'd like to see us react to.